From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you, and here's what's ahead. K-State's Dan O'Brien standing by to discuss the possibility of significant premiums being paid for high-protein wheat as the Kansas harvest draws near. And he'll talk about how the grain markets in general have locked in on current growing conditions in the U.S. Also, K-State's Robin Reid going over the details of two items of importance to you producers relating to crop insurance. The just announced premium benefit on spring-planted crop insurance for those who grew cover crops these past few months, and particulars on crop insurance prevented planting provisions. And awaiting to talk Kansas agricultural weather with us, K-State's Mary Knapp. Plus more here on Agriculture Today.
Make hand washing a healthy habit everywhere you go. Wash your hands with soap and water for at least 20 seconds, especially after going to the bathroom, before, during, and after preparing food, and before eating. If soap and water aren't available, use a hand sanitizer that has at least 60% alcohol. Life is better with clean hands. A message from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
This is Agriculture Today. Good to have you aboard for our Friday edition. To the grain markets we go now, and the latest trends covered by our guest, grain market economist Dan O'Brien, K-State Research and Extension. We're linked up with him from his office in Colby, northwest Kansas. Domestic weather developments, Dan, have taken the wheel in these markets, especially the row crops of late.
It does seem that the attention that we've been showing to South American dry conditions, which haven't really alleviated for second crop corn in Brazil, have now shifted to our own crop conditions. And, of course, the hot spots, literally speaking, are up in the Dakotas, over into Montana, et cetera. When you look at the drought monitor numbers, really a number of areas in a northern corn belt that are at issue. The rains have come in recent weeks, have kind of cut a swath from southwest Kansas up into southern Iowa and areas like that, to where we're really not worried about moisture at the moment there. However, certainly we don't have quite as positive weather conditions as you head up into some of those northern states. When you look at rated subsoil moistures today and in the next week for what it's projected, you see predicted soil moisture is still really dry in northern Iowa, over into southern Wisconsin, Michigan, and actually a fair swath of Indiana. And that's along with the dry conditions in the Dakotas and again, southern Minnesota. Some of the volatility that happened yesterday in the market had to do with the weather forecast that had been shifting around. Weather forecaster had indicated they thought things were going to be dry, then they changed their mind and turned the other direction, and still you're looking out there X number of weeks trying to figure things out. It is interesting that news from up in Canada, from our, person I used to formerly sit in this position, Bill Tierney, was talking about weather forecasts from up north of the border about high pressure ridge setting up in that area. Well, they're already dry as all get out. So you've got that, and that adds to the wheat market issue. So here we've got our harvest coming on for wheat, where in a typical situation we'd be looking at harvest pressures on at least on basis, if not futures, coming in. Whereas at the same time, up in hard red spring wheat areas, both in the U.S. and to the north, they're looking at just tough, dry conditions affecting all of that.
Centering on corn for a moment here, the trade more or less in a sideways pattern of late. Are there pricing opportunities afoot here? Well,
yes. And you and I talked off-air before we started here about how wet conditions have pushed planting windows later than a lot of people were comfortable with, and how price signals now might be supporting corn, might be supporting grain, sorghum, as people make their choices. Could be supporting soybeans as well, who knows, as they go forward. But it is interesting to see these forward contract prices we have. If people can get the crop in the ground, there's moisture right now in subsoil in our part of the world anyway. Just to look at the forward contract prices listed yesterday across these major locations we've been tracking here in the state. For corn, Colby at 562, Salina 557, Topeka 538, Garden City, demand center for corn 601, Hutchinson 552, and Columbus, Kansas, southeast corner 547. Now compare that to grain sorghum. Although the cash price of grain sorghum is weakened relative to the cash price of corn up front, the spot price, the new crop contracts are really strong for sorghum. Colby area 612, again, corn was 562, 632 in Salina, corn was 557, 631 Topeka, 538 and for corn for a new crop, 626 in Garden City, 601 for corn, and there's not as much difference there. I think they're just happy to get feed grains, period, in that area. In South Central, Hutchinson area, 607 sorghum, 552 corn, new crop contracts, 572 in Southeast, Columbus, Kansas, 547 for corn. Now, every one of these prices is way beating full economic costs. And along with price, people are also going to look at number of bushels. So you've got these issues in play when people make a decision. But on the price side, for new crop prospects, grain sorghum forward contract bids look awfully good. And really, when a farmer's going to make that choice of what to plant, they'll have to look at the number of bushels times that price to get a revenue number relative to their costs, and then see what they want to do.
Before we leave the feed grain side, you say there are oddities evident in the ethanol market. What mean you by that, Dad?
Well, on the one hand, ethanol plants ramping up production in anticipation of summer driving season. Oh, yes, by the way, gasoline prices going strong, indicating no lack of demand. And we're cutting back on COVID regulations generally in most parts of the country. Things are, quote, opening up more, traveling more readily done. So the outlook for fuel demand looks good, and ethanol is part of that. Now, here yesterday, we had some real volatility happen in the ethanol. It's kind of a spike up, spike down, et cetera. And all that happened on a day when this data is indicating that, gosh, we've got more inventory on hand. So summer driving season affects RBOB gasoline and ethanol, and we mix those two together to try to meet consumer demand. And all this at the same time that ethanol prices at Kansas locations at $2.34. Now, we were wondering about $1.27, $1.28, something like that, not 6-8 months ago. Well, so nationally, we're strongly above $2 per gallon and trying to keep up with demand. It is noteworthy to me that in looking at the bids for corn, and we're just talking about the cash bids for corn here in Kansas, the highest bid $7.22 at Garden City, $7.10 Columbus, and the others $6.90, $6.80, something like that. Strong corn bids. When you go to the ethanol plants, every corn bid from Kansas through the 3 I states, Ohio, Michigan, they all have a 7. Indiana has an 8 in front of it. So the ethanol plants are pulling demand. They're trying to get hold of corn, but there's also no bid, at least listed, for grain sorghum anywhere going into ethanol plants. So still focusing sorghum upon the export markets, apparently. And, this conundrum that you and I have been talking about and wrestling with of how we get through the next several months and whether wheat feeding will be part of that, you have to wonder, will sorghum feeding be part of that? If basically we're seeing corn prices having such a tremendous run-up. So I think that's going to be a target set of information for me to be watching anyway, to see how the run-up in corn is affecting these other crops in the next coming months.
We'll keep on top of that. Soybeans in a quick-hitting fashion here. We've seen weakness in that complex of late. Is that, too, a product of improving weather conditions domestically or something else going on?
Right now, South America, Brazil in particular, has their harvest in. And given strikes and whatever else, still, it's all there to be had by China, by other buyers. So you have pretty strong demand right now. Our export movement slowed considerably with the onset of Brazil's available supplies. I would say when you look at the charts, when you look at corn, hard red winter wheat, and soybeans has held up as good or better than anybody. But actually the best commodity that's held up has been hard red spring wheat. If they came off the highs that they had about a couple months ago and are right back at them, if not going higher, well, that's where that drought's at that we were talking about earlier.
And speaking of wheat, again, spring wheat priced higher than winter wheat at the moment here. We are churning right along toward harvest time here in Kansas, Dan, and one has to wonder if pricing opportunities exist yet advantageous to the grower.
Well, we have a number of ifs. If number one is if feed grain supplies are so tight that we start pulling in wheat out of the cash markets into users, into livestock feeders, even though it's a transition still, it'll be there in quantity. Do we pull that into ethanol plants? We can do it. It all involves a transition. So that's possible. I think that the issue that really stands out to me is that we have had rains. We're probably going to have bushels. But with the rains that we've had, how will our proteins be? You would think in most cases that when you have more bushels, what nitrogen we had, we spread it out over more bushels, our protein's a little bit lower. Well, the place where we normally go to compensate for low protein, hard red spring wheat areas, they're having a terrible time. So that's going to be a real deal. And I would wonder, it makes sense to me, and I hope my agronomic brethren straighten me out if I'm wrong on this, that in a time when we typically have generally lower proteins, if an individual farmer happens to be fortunate enough or wise enough to have skilled enough to have high protein, it could be a really good year. Have some high protein available to mix with lower protein and be able to gather in some premiums on that. So we'll see how that plays out in our backyard. But if their supplies are so cramped up in the northern states with spring wheat with higher protein, then I would think we'd have some pretty good wheat protein premiums here in the hard red winter wheat area if we can find them.
Another item to watch there, and unbelievably, we're probably about a week away from first test cutting in far southern Kansas. So the time is nigh, or almost so. Dan, thanks as always for your comments on the markets.
Thanks, Eric. Take care.
And his notes on the grain trades and the market movements of the past several days are, of course, posted on the agmanager.info website now, agmanager.info. Grain market economist, K-State Research and Extension, Dan O'Brien with us here on Agriculture Today.
When a thunderstorm approaches, follow these safety tips. Lightning, known as the underrated killer, usually strikes the tallest objects. So avoid standing beneath trees or other isolated tall objects. Take shelter in a sturdy building. Remember, if you're close enough to hear thunder, you're close enough to be struck by lightning. Help keep you and your family safe this severe weather season. For the National Weather Service, I'm Bill Curtis.
Next up for you on Agriculture Today, a pair of items of interest to you crop producers. Joining us is agricultural economist Robin Reid, K-State Research and Extension. And the first of the two things we'll talk about, Robin, was news out of the USDA and more specifically the Risk Management Agency just a few days back. An opportunity being availed to those who grow cover crops relating to their crop insurance premiums. What's the story?
Well, this is being called the Pandemic Cover Crop Program, or PCCP. So kind of an interesting one that they rolled out. Nothing like we've had or seen in the past. But basically what it's going to do is give you a $5 per acre reduction on your crop insurance premium if you qualify for this program. So again, it's not a payment. It's a reduction on your crop insurance premium of $5 an acre. And the rationale for this was with the economic challenges of the pandemic, it made it financially challenging for producers to put in cover crops, knowing it's more of a long-term soil health and erosion benefit. But it's in hindsight. To qualify for this program, you basically have to have bought insurance on your spring crop. So our corn, soybeans, and grain sorghum that are going in the ground right now or have been in the ground here would qualify for this if there's an insurance product on them and there had been a qualifying cover crop during the 2021 year. So what that means is you would have to have that cover crop in the ground last fall over the winter, terminating it this spring to qualify for this program. as a cover crop.
In other words, you couldn't go out tomorrow and seed a cover crop for purposes of eligibility here.
Exactly. So we're kind of looking back on this. And, that's kind of the problem as far enough down the road as we are that a lot of these cover crops have been long terminated. But if the field is going to a spring crop and it's insured, it would qualify. And what you need to do on this is go to your FSA office, or as they're remote working, contact your FSA office, I should say. And you need to file an FSA 578 by June 15th. And this is your normal acreage reporting form that you do on all your crops. Here in Kansas, you do that by July 15th. But this specifically, you need to list your cover crops and turn it in by June 15th. And then internally, they'll communicate with RMA, and your approved insurance provider will deduct that $5 per acre off your crop insurance premium.
To note, June 15th is a week from this coming Tuesday, so that deadline is rather imminent here. What cover crops qualify for this?
Well, cover crops is a pretty broad term for a lot of different things. And basically the key here is it could not be harvested as a grain crop. So, cover crop would be your grasses, legumes, forbs, any seasonal cover for conservation purposes. It needs to be terminated by NRCS guidelines. So that would be, frost over the winter, depending on the crop, or a chemical application, crimping, rolling, tillage, or cutting. You could have also grazed this cover crop over the winter, so it could be grazed, hayed, or foraged and still qualify as a cover crop. The key here is how you're reporting it to FSA. It has to be reported as a cover crop code in their reporting system in order to flag this to have the premium reduction through RMA.
There are some important exceptions to this that relate to the type of crop insurance policy one might carry, though, right, Robin?
Yeah, and I will be honest, I don't totally understand the rationale for a couple of these exceptions. Two of them are whole farm revenue protection and margin protection. So those are products that are just operate differently than our traditional crop insurance revenue protection products. So those are excluded from this. The two I don't quite understand, if you took the enhanced coverage option or the supplemental coverage option on top of your individual product, they're saying you don't qualify for this pandemic cover crop program. And again, I don't quite understand why, but that is the rule.
Important stipulation there for quite a few folks might have taken ECO or SCO as options on their policy. But all questions can be answered at that local FSA counter. That's where to start. Yes,
I would definitely contact your local FSA office. Again, if you had cover crops over this past winter, you can report them by June 15th on the FSA 578 form and go ahead and qualify for this $5 per acre reduction on your crop insurance premium.
All right. The second item we want to get into today, and it is related directly to our planting delays around Kansas and in the surrounding states because of excessively wet weather, prevented planting provisions that would apply to insurance coverage. And we're really focusing mostly on corn here now, given the stated deadlines for these provisions.
Yeah, so I've been getting a couple questions this week, and that's because it is now the late planting period for corn in Kansas. So the final planting date for corn in southeast Kansas was the 15th of May. In central Kansas, it's the 25th. And in northeast, the 25th. And then the western third of our state was May 31st. So that's where most of my questions seem to be coming from, is western Kansas. But just kind of as a refresher here, you have 20 days past these dates to be able to still plant that initial crop in the late planting period. The caveat is your crop insurance coverage is reduced 1% each day after that late planting date. So you can still put the crop in, but your coverage is going to be reduced some if you go ahead and still plant. But after 20 days, then you would be in the prevented plant crop insurance bucket. Now, if you're facing that decision, we have a spreadsheet on Ag Manager that helps you evaluate those options, and it's called KSU Prevented Planting on Corn. This was actually something that Monty Vandeveer, one of our area economists, developed in 2019, when you remember the historic prevented plant and flooding that we had, not just on our state, but in the Midwest. So I just took this out, revamped it a little bit, and reposted it so it's current with the crop insurance prices and some of the production costs that have changed in those 3 years. Now, what this spreadsheet does, and even if you don't use this spreadsheet, this is the options you have if you're in this situation. Again, you can plant in the late planting period up until 20 days past the date, or you can go ahead and take prevented plant now on that corn and not plant that field. You could go to soybeans, could go to grain sorghum, depending on what you have for chemical on that field. Those may or may not be options for you. Or the other thing is you can take 35% of your corn prevented plant payment, and then you could go to soybeans or grain sorghum, but it has to be after the late planting period. So, number of different options here, and it is a very individualized decision, and that's because of your production costs, because of your anticipated yields, price expectations for this fall. But what I'm looking at is, in a lot of situations, it still pays to put that crop in the ground even though we're late, or go to a different crop, just because we're anticipating such high prices this fall.
As you mentioned, though, so many variables go into this, and they will differ from operation to operation if you think about input costs in particular. So that makes it worthwhile to utilize this tool to crank the numbers.
Yes, absolutely. And what the tool gives you is just kind of your bottom line, like what is your net amount. If you just took prevented plant, you're going to have some chemical costs of maintaining, that weeds and stuff over this production year, or going to other crops. But again, making sure you can find the correct seed, the correct maturity seed and that kind of thing, and what chemicals are already on there and what your options are given that. And so there's a lot that goes into that, but basically just breaking that all down to all your different options and what your expected net income would be in the bottom line.
So corn growers, if you're in that boat, be sure to check out this tool. It's available on agmanager.info. We're still a ways away from the late planting deadline for soybeans and for sorghum, right?
Yes. So I just want to throw those dates out there and, not to scare anybody, just say, hey, things are going to dry up, and I don't anticipate a repeat of 2019. But for our soybeans, our northern counties are all June 15th when you have to have those soybeans in for the final planting date. For our middle counties, southwest and east central Kansas, it would be the 20th or the 25th, and then southeast Kansas, June 30th. And you have 25 days after that final planting date for the late planting period. So we have time yet on that. Grain sorghum is June 25th for the entire state. So I do think we will get those crops in and not have to worry about that. But those that have had corn, that deadline has passed. One other thing I was going to mention is replanting, as we've had a lot of rain and some flooding across the state. Just mention if you do need to replant parts of your field, definitely talk to your crop insurance agent and have it looked at before you do so.
And there are, unfortunately, too many producers in that very scenario right now, trying to decide whether to replant or go another direction. But once more, do check out that decision tool on prevented planting choices at agmanager.info, and we will keep abreast of what's going on cropping-wise as we move forward. Robin, thank you for coming over on these two matters and sharing some information with us here.
You're welcome, Eric.
She's Robin Reid, over from the Agricultural Economics Department here at Kansas State University. You're listening to Agriculture Today. After the break, today's agricultural news headlines, plus much more for you, here on the K-State Radio Network.
With the shortage of primary care physicians, especially in rural areas, health education and disease prevention are vital. K-State research and extension programs address quality of life, personal development, and health behaviors across all life stages of all social economic groups. To learn more about health education, one of K-State Research and Extension's 5 grand challenges, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, coming to you from the campus of Kansas State University. Eric Atkinson back with you, and with these headlines from today's agricultural news page for you, courtesy in part of DTN. JBS USA, the victim of that cyber attack that prompted the company to suspend activity at its U.S. beef slaughter facilities, said yesterday that the situation has now been resolved. JBS USA and Pilgrim's Pride announced that all of their global facilities are fully operational after resolution of the criminal cyber attack back on Sunday. As a result, JBS and Pilgrim's were able to limit the loss of food produced during the attack to less than 1 day's worth of production. Any lost production across the company's global business will be fully recovered, they say, by the end of next week, limiting any potential negative impact on producers, consumers, and the company's workforce. The company also said it activated its cybersecurity protocols, including voluntarily shutting down all of its systems to isolate the intrusion, to limit the potential infection, and preserve its core systems. In addition, JBS encrypted backup servers which were not infected during the attack, allowing for a return to operations sooner than expected. With no new herbicide modes of action on the horizon, agrochemical companies have been searching for options to battle herbicide-resistant weeds, and now Bayer Crop Science may have found something in Europe, according to the manager of Bayer's portfolio of selective herbicides in corn, soybeans, and cotton in North America, Frank Ritteman. Bayer is now working on bringing diflufenican, a selective broadleaf herbicide, to U.S. and Canadian corn and soybean farmers, with a primary aim of helping tackle pigweed species such as water hemp and Palmer amaranth, which are rapidly outpacing herbicide control options. Pending regulatory approval, the company hopes it will be commercially available for pre-plant and pre-emergence applications in the mid-2020s. Now, most recently, weed scientists have uncovered Palmer amaranth populations with 6-way resistance to herbicides. Also, they've found water hemp populations with 7-way resistance. Even relatively recent herbicide-tolerant weed platforms, such as Extend and Enlist, are running quickly into the problem. Palmer amaranth developing resistance to dicamba and glufosinate in past 2 years, with 2,4-D resistance likely as well. Diflufenican is a Group 12 herbicide. It's a pigment inhibitor with residual activity. Although it's not a new mode of action globally, this class of herbicides is not currently in use in corn and soybean fields in the U.S. Ritteman said that Bayer's internal testing showed good activity against the pigweed species so far. The herbicide, though, has not been widely available to academic scientists for testing in the U.S., but Ritteman said that Bayer hopes to expand access to it in the next couple of years, and part of that will involve broader testing with university specialists. And the Kansas Department of Agriculture's Division of Animal Health is asking horse owners now to take proactive steps to prevent the transmission of vesicular stomatitis virus, that equine disease common in the summer months, VSV transmitted by insects. In recent years, we've seen an increase in cases of VSV in Kansas. This would entail strict fly control, VSV primarily spread by black flies and midges. They're asking horse owners to keep their pens clean and use appropriate fly sprays and traps. Also, regularly inspect horses for symptoms that might indicate VSV, those blister-like lesions, fever, excessive salivation, reluctance to eat, or lameness. And if you're traveling to events with horses from other properties, keep those horses separated and don't share equipment, tools, tack, or water buckets. Now, Kansas again experienced a significant outbreak of VSV last year, positive cases on over 100 premises in 26 counties. Other species, including cattle, can be susceptible to it as well, although it's primarily an equine disease. Go to agriculture.ks.gov/VSV for more information about the disease's symptoms and prevention. Now, this week's Kansas Wheat Scoop. Here's Marcia Boswell.
The aroma of freshly baked bread wafting through the room. The happy chatter of attendees as they taste samples. While these hands-on experiences are hard to replicate, don't miss out on this year's National Festival of Breads just because it's virtual. Tune in on June 9th to hear the stories behind the finalists' winning recipes, learn some new baking tips, and watch the crowning of America's next top bread baker. According to Cindy Falk, co-chairperson of the event, our virtual contest expanded opportunities for adult and youth competitors and for everyone to join us to celebrate from the comfort of their own homes. The 7th National Festival of Breads is sponsored by Red Star Yeast, King Arthur Baking Company, and Kansas Wheat. Recipes submitted by 3 adults and 2 youth finalists were handpicked to be featured during this year's virtual festival. Who will win the Best of Breads champion, and who was voted as the People's Choice winners? Will it be Anna Barth from Long Beach, California, who based the recipe for her savory Thai peanut sauce rolls on her family's secret ingredient for their favorite PB&J sandwich, Thai peanut sauce, of course? Will the hand-harvested wild rice featured in hearty wild rice and tart cherry bread take the top prize? Submitted by Barbara Easterbrook from Appleton, Wisconsin, the recipe also features orange marmalade, dried tart cherries, pecans, and maple syrup. Or will Susan Simpson from Harrington, Delaware take the top spot? She grew up on her German grandmother's kitchen counter, transcribing the handfuls of flour and splashes of milk into the recipe she would adapt to be her entry, apricot raisin babka ring. And don't forget about the youth finalists, both high schoolers from Kansas. Maddie McKee, a high school senior from Wamego, created her coffee shop-inspired blueberry blossom tree braids as part of a school internship class. The creative bread shape includes buttermilk, honey, dark espresso, twisted into a tree, and topped with a dollop of blueberry jam in each top blossom. And Maggie Schlichter's strawberry lemonade swirls combine some of summer's favorite flavors. The Clay Center teen based her zesty recipe, which combines homemade red strawberry jam and lemon-flavored dough, on a recipe from the 2019 National Festival of Breads, which Schlichter attended with her grandmother. Hungry yet? Don your apron and try out the winning recipes for yourself before the contest at nationalfestivalofbreads.com. Then tune in at 3 p.m. Central on June 9th on Facebook at facebook.com/National Festival of Breads to see if your favorite wins a prize. For Kansas Wheat, I'm Marcia Boswell.
Thanks, Marcia. And you're listening to Agriculture Today.
When you are in need of timely, reliable, and trusted information, K-State Research and Extension is here. Whether it's organizing people, information, or resources, they have the necessary tools. Community comes first for K-State Research and Extension. For more information and to connect with your county's extension agents, visit www.ksre.k-state.edu.
Topping off this Agriculture Today, Kansas agricultural weather, courtesy of the Weather Data Library here at K-State, and Research and Extension climatologist Mary Knapp with fresh in hand the summary for the month of May. Mary, it had to be a wetter than normal May, wasn't it?
Well, statewide, it was wetter than normal. We averaged 5.5 inches across the state, which is 132% of normal, so a little bit above normal. There were 2 divisions that didn't quite break the normal. That was the South Central and the Southeast. South Central averaged 4.29 inches, which is 1/10 of an inch below what they would typically see, so they were at 98% of normal. The Southeast averaged 5.55 inches, which is 26/100ths of an inch below what they would typically see, and that puts them in at 96. So a little bit less than normal, but not enough to really cause much concern.
And for the record, the heavier rainfall totals were where?
Well, the heaviest were actually running through the center part of the state. Tribune had the highest single-day total for a National Weather Service site when they had that 5.66 inches on the 16th. For the Kokoras, we had that at a station just north of Salina in Saline County, where they had 6.56 inches. If we looked at the monthly total, we move over to Princeton in Franklin County, and they had 13.66 inches for the month.
Wow.
And Morris County near White City had the biggest for the Kokoros total, and that was over 16 inches. So, again, some very hefty rainfall totals.
No question about that. We'll talk about what that meant to the drought monitor again in just a second. Cooler than normal temperatures along with that?
Yes, we were cooler than normal, and that was universal across the state. Northwest didn't have quite the departure that the other areas did, Northwest, West Central in particular, but they typically stay cooler as we leave May and move into June. The Southeast had the biggest departure, and they were running just about 3 degrees cooler than they would typically see for May. In contrast, the West Central was about 0.6 of a degree cooler than average. So, yes, it was cooler, which the producers out there have been lamenting the lack of activity on their spring-planted crops, and they're simply not getting the growing degree units that they would typically expect to see.
That may turn around shortly. We'll talk about that as well. But in the aftermath of the month of May, the drought monitor is a shadow of its former self here in Kansas.
Right. We have less than 3% of the state that has any sort of drought. There's a pocket of abnormally dry conditions in the Northeast and another pocket in the Southeast. Everywhere else is drought-free, and the biggest changes, of course, were in the western part of the state, where there were as much as 2 categories of improvement during the month of May. Again, not surprising given the plentiful rains that fell out in that area in May.
Looking ahead, we may have a rare week of dry weather coming up soon.
Right. The outlook for the week, the quantitative precip forecast is calling for basically a dry week. The only area that might see some moisture would be lingering in the eastern fringes of the state. Unfortunately, we could see those kind of pop-up showers that we have seen on a couple of days where one spot has a thunderstorm bubble up over it and drop rain and everybody else is dry. And that's going to be difficult to calculate where that might develop. There might be a 10 or a 20% chance in the area that somebody will get rain, but overall it's going to be a dry pattern.
And warmer temperatures, and we've talked about, as you mentioned earlier, the need for growing degree units to start to add up for our row crops, and this will be at least heading in that direction.
It will definitely be a start. We're looking at highs in the mid-80s, maybe touch 90. As important, it's the fact that we're going to keep our low temperatures in the 60s rather than in the 50s and 40s, so that will, again, allow for greater accumulation of those growing degree units. At this point, it doesn't look like we're going to suffer from the heat that has plagued the northern plains. We're not looking at temperatures breaking the century mark, but still it will be warmer than it has been so far. And the other thing that will be welcome is actually getting some sunshine. It's been a very dreary May, so we'll look forward to having a couple of days of sunshine as well.
And the extended outlook really covering the remainder of the month of June. Some interesting features there, you say.
Right. The outlook that was released favors equal chances on the precipitation. Not surprisingly, at this summertime, the convective storms can go one way or the other. If you have them, you could be wet. If you don't, you could be dry. So that's not particularly surprising. What is interesting is that cooler than normal temperatures are favored across most of the state for June. When we look at the June, July, and August outlook, that favors warmer than normal. So we'll have to see how that plays out and whether we really truly see cooler temperatures in June.
One definite positive, though, those cooler temperatures, Mary, would be beneficial to the winter wheat crop as it tries to round itself into harvest form and the grain filling this may be just perfect for that.
It certainly would be the optimal temperature range for filling out that winter wheat, and we'll hopefully avoid a repeat of the hail events that we had in May. April was very quiet. In contrast, May was extremely active in the severe weather with over 122 hail events, and some of them were rather large hail events. So hopefully we'll have the warm, dry weather. There's plenty of moisture to finish off the head filling and get into optimal harvest conditions.
Well, appreciate it as always. We'll have you back next Friday. Thanks, Mary.
Thanks, Eric.
She recaps the Kansas agriculture weather scene with us each week here. Research and Extension climatologist Mary Knapp with us. Our time is away for today and for the week. Thanks for tuning in. We'll be back here on Monday. Hope you will be as well. Until then, Eric Atkinson bidding you a good weekend for Agriculture Today. This is the K-State Radio Network.